it was a really nice touch this morning. We all knew we were going to go see Garang, Kuol and Awer Mabil. And Thomas Deng showed up as well. And I think that spoke volumes for the trio that we have here in the Socceroos, who are not just the epitome of modern Australia, they're role models for the Socceroos and for our game and for our country.
Yeah, supposedly Thomas Deng insisted that he wanted to be part of this press conference, which was just wonderful to see. There's a real bond between those guys, and the Socceroos, it's always been said, most accurately reflect the changing face of Australia, more so than any other national sporting team when you compare it to cricket, rugby league, whatever. And I think these three boys and Keanu Bacchus, who of course is of South African descent, most certainly epitomised that. And it was a beautiful, beautiful press conference, and a lovely shot of them three at the end, and they all spoke really well.
I was in Kuwait in 2018 when Thomas Deng and Awer Mabil made their debut together, and Mabil scored in the 88th minute, and the first player to celebrate with him was his childhood friend Thomas Deng. And there was so much excitement that day. They'd grown up. They were much more mature today. There was a bit of riffing. They were bantering. Garang, Kuol in the middle was sort of the funny guy. Those two were talking more about their experiences, about life. And we know what Awer Mabil has been through. You know, he lost his sister so tragically during the Asian Cup in 2019, found out minutes after the team had lost, and had to go home to that awful news. And now here he is at a World Cup, he's playing, or he's at a club at least, in La Liga. Talked very honestly about the difficulties he has there, about not playing, doesn't understand why. The coach won't really tell him. He started the season really well and then has hardly played in the last 10 games. But he's here, he's at the World Cup, that's his motivation to perform and to live up to, as he says, he wants to be a role model and he wants to inspire other kids.
Felt like he had a point to prove, talking about his time in La Liga. Spoke with eloquence and maturity as if he was almost the leader of this trio who are becoming leaders in their own right. And I hung off every word he said because he said it with such conviction. And I found it really inspiring to see the trio of them, how they have taken on this responsibility of being this epitome of modern Australia. And I found their answer really interesting when someone said, do you get tired about talking about this? Or do you think it's an issue that we have to continue to talk about this? And their response today was really fascinating, that no, we want people to hear our stories so we can continue to pave the way for the kids coming through.
Yeah, that's right. And when you look at the age, Mabil about 27, Deng about 24, Kuol just turned 18. So you've got that as well as the geographic spread. Mabil being from Adelaide, Deng from Melbourne, born in Adelaide but moved to Melbourne. And then Kuol, who of course was born and bred in Shepparton and moved over to the Central Coast where he's become a success story. But I agree, like Mabil was... I was hanging off every word also, and that showed real poise and leadership. So he's not only a leader amongst that group of boys, but he's one of the Socceroos leaders. He's one of the boys that I can really see stepping up on the field at this World Cup.
What's really important when you have a kid like Garang Kuol, not just his age, but the hype, it could so easily go to his head. He's at a World Cup. He could go off the rails so quickly. Those two seem to have... the elder brothers, either side, literally and metaphorically, they're guiding him. Culturally, they understand him. They understand his background. They can speak his language, again, literally, metaphorically. And it's so important to have those figures to whom he can relate. They're not really old. Particularly Deng is within that sort of age where he can relate to him and understand, and a few guiding words here and there. You really got the sense that they were going to look after him.
I've mentioned on this podcast feed before, when it's the A-League podcast, my experience with Garang Kuol before the All-Stars game, where he was genuinely starstruck, but still very focused, still very sure of himself, but still happy to crack a joke. At every press conference, he's cracked a joke. He's had a real personality about him, a real sass. He was more serious today. Yeah. He didn't want to give away a line that was going to be blown up. He had his wits about him. He was still focused. Still cracked a really nice line, about how the intensity of training was crazy. But I thought there was a flick switched in him today.
I was watching him really closely. There was a moment there towards the end of the presser where he was just going like this. He had his fingers on his chin and it was almost like, let's get this done and dusted. I want to get back there and I want to continue my preparations for this World Cup. And I reckon that's what was going through his mind here. He's actually... his life's changed in the last 4 or 5 months off the back of dribbling 5 players in the A-League All-Stars game. Socceroos call up, getting signed for Newcastle United, an A-League's All-Access episode. all about him. And I actually got a really unique insight into him being involved in that series. And that game in which he was the feature, Central Coast at home to Western United. They're down 2-0 at halftime. He knows the cameras are in his face. They've been following him all day, all week, and he comes on in the second half and completely changes the game. And that to me says that this kid loves the big occasion, he loves the attention, the bigger the better. And there's been so much talk about, and we always hear it in Australian football. I remember when Daniel Arzani was coming through, it was you focus on the negatives. He can't defend, he hasn't played enough minutes. In Garang's Kuol's case, he hasn't started an A-League game, he has started an FFA Cup game. It is quite extraordinary that he has made a World Cup squad. However, every opportunity that he's got, and he's come off the bench and he's had the bright lights shining on him, he has delivered. And there was a real steely determination about him today. He'll play at this World Cup, and I wouldn't be surprised if he makes a big impact.
Just one more on this, and you've done a lot of work, Dave, around particularly the documentary Football Belongs and the multicultural impact multiculturalism has had on Australian and Australian football. And we're seeing these three gentlemen are a new wave, and it's a really interesting new chapter for our sport and our country, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a wonderful story. I mean, again, some of the other sports, and particularly the AFL, do an amazing job at beating the multiculturalism drum. But when you look at the A-League numbers, there's over 30 players of African descent who have grown up in Australia and have broken into the competition, and that's now continued onto the senior national team. We've been seeing it for the youth national teams for a number of years, and it's just it's a beautiful story. And I think obviously they will educate a lot of Australia throughout this tournament. And if one of them does something special at this World Cup, and obviously you put it on, you put your money on the attackers, your Garang Quolls or your Awer Mabils. Again, I think their story is going to go to the broader public, and I think it's going to play a really big role in terms of improving this country.
It's funny, I remember doing a feature in 2007 on the Joeys and the African kids they had, and I know a couple of them are now coaching in Victoria and are involved in this next wave, and there's much more of a sense that that was a bit of a false start, but now, particularly in Adelaide, there are players. It's going to be generations coming through.
Do you recall some of the names?
Well, T-Boy
Kamara, yep,
and Tadros.
Yep.
Tom Tadros, I think he is, and I think they're coaching now in Victoria, and now it's going to be the younger brothers of these kids will be inspired, and the younger sisters. And then as they get a bit older and they have their own kids, so we're not going to be waiting generation. We're going to see a cascade of players coming through, and it's fantastic.